to the computadora. All right. So on the agenda, there's actually not a ton this week. There are no updates on the roadmap side of the house. I have written the foundation stage strategy brief to share up with Justin. So he's out at the PLT offsite this week. So when he's back, I'll talk with him and we'll make sure that we're on the same page about, what our group is doing over the rest of the year. And if there are any changes, I'll communicate those as necessary. But until we hear it, no changes. We're doing the same thing, which is dark mode. Um, so how's the dark mode rollout looking? Jeremy, you got the first point in there.
Yeah, I last part of that to answer your question directly, like no other updates. Like I'm not working on anything with dark mode rollout because there's no audits
Amazing.
happening.
It's like the first
Uh,
time in 2 years.
well, it's been this is probably week two of the same thing where it's like there's nothing going on. But to that point, very little activity in the AMAs. We did have one of our new product designers popped into the AMA just to see what's going on and see what we were
Yeah.
talking about. And they asked about uh, like design process for dark mode because they're wondering like how are we able to design in dark mode? Like should we be? And I don't have a good answer. We haven't addressed it.
Hmm.
There's an Epic linked there.
Hmm.
I did ping you in that I think yesterday or so,
I
the day
respond
before.
30 seconds before this meeting started, so you probably haven't
Okay,
seen it yet.
yeah, I haven't. So just if that's something we need to pick up with product design managers or whatnot, but I basically said you're going to be responsible for it.
Mhm.
So that's as far as I know at this point. Anyway, that's all I got.
Look at it at some point.
Basically, like just I explained like what I would do. I would still design primarily in light mode because that's the
Mhm.
majority of our audience. I think Jeff, we're still working on getting that dashboard right to know what our stats are for dark mode.
Yeah, I've opened the request to get the data, but it hadn't been picked up yet.
Okay. I don't know if we could push on that since that's one of our like top priorities, but
Well, the challenge
um
is everybody has top priorities for data. So even
uh
when it's really important for us, we
got
get
it.
have to get stuck in line. Hey,
Okay.
Matt, quit tearing things up.
But I think that would help. And uh but anyways, that's all I could say is this is how I would approach it today.
Mhm.
But we don't have any guidance or designers or UX as a whole or UXR, QA, any of that. So
Okay. Um, yeah, just to restate what I put in there, like we don't need it for beta. It's fine. We've largely done all the work to fix the product in its current state. And so during our GA timeline over the next few months, we can update those docs. I think the big thing we'll need to address is like, frankly, I don't know how all the various designers are working today. I don't know what of their habits are going to cause problems and need to change. So I'll need to lean on you and Dan to kind of figure that out. Um, but then we also need to communicate largely that like if you do it in the way that we're suggesting, like I think in semantic terms, you're going to save a lot of effort because you don't have to design it twice, right? If you just say this is warning text, cool, you're done. You don't have to worry about what it looks like in light mode or dark mode or high contrast mode or any of the other ones that we may eventually ship. Um, so we can start slotting that stuff into maybe the next milestone or two, but it's nothing that we need to worry about before we go to beta.
okay. That's good to know. Yeah, I think the risk is I think you kind of alluded to it is if there's any behaviors or things that introduce regression before we
Yep.
get to because there's a lot of work in flight.
Yeah, for
Uh
sure.
I think what I might do is maybe signal boost some of those things like, hey, if you're designing in dark mode, like think, how to think in semantic terms, just little plugs here and there for these kind of
Yeah,
things.
for
The
sure.
unofficial documentation might help. So,
For sure. Yeah,
Uh, when Dan did the sort of investigation into the designer and developer handoff part of the process, he found there was so much variability in how people do that. There was no like single process. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if just sort of the design process, like everyone's design process is similarly fragmented and everyone has their own things that they do. And so it might be best not to think about integrating design, dark mode into the design process and more about checkpoints or sort of like things that you need to review before handoff kind of a thing. And it's less about like us telling them, hey, here's how to make it in your process, but it's more like before handoff, you should check that these three things have happened. Figure out, and at that point, it's just kind of on you to put that in your process.
Okay. Well, at the very least, we could maybe start looking to pull some of that stuff into the next milestone. Start at least capturing what we need to do and figure out where we're going to post it and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, and I don't know where we're at with like the plugin front and whatnot, but some kind of a Figma plugin for linting could be helpful too for designers to run before handoff and be like, oh, you've got 30 layers that are not using design token or a variable for color and
Is linting a thing in Figma?
oh yeah, yeah,
Yes.
there's yeah, definitely.
I did not know that. That's
We're
interesting.
we already have a feature that's kind of close to that, which is the variable viewer. And then all we have to do is kind of add logic on top of that. And in theory, it's pretty doable from what we've already got.
This is maybe going a bit off topic, but how are lints surfaced?
It depends on how the thing about doing it in a plugin is you have to go in and you have to run the plugin. So it's not going to be like in code where you save and it says, hey, you can't do that. So it'll be a manual process by the designer, but it's better than nothing.
Cool.
But yeah, it'll be opt-in. There's not really a way around that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm not aware of any, but yeah,
Yeah.
it would just be like one stage in the process, like you were talking about, Chris, with like handoff, like as part of those checks. Like, oh, I want to check, run this part of your plugin, and if you've got a bunch of color styles in there, like consider replacing them because if you don't and it gets implemented that way, then it's not going to work for dark mode,
Yeah.
So that's yeah. Our handoff process is very, very fragmented.
Okay. I definitely want to avoid having us fix the entire design process for the org. But we can at least communicate like, whatever you do, check these things. And if we could say,
Yeah.
click this button and it'll tell you what's wrong, that would be even better.
Yeah. I think that's the thing is that like there really isn't a design process. So there's nothing even to fix.
Yeah.
It's just it's a very open source process right now. So
Okay.
that's why I mentioned like surfacing it to PDMs because it's like
Mhm.
those are the roles that would be able to say, oh yeah, we should enforce this type of process or
Yeah,
let's connect on creating this process.
that makes sense.
So
That makes
it's
sense.
it's just shifting the weight to there rather than making it a responsibility on us. It's just calling it out like, hey, you guys are going to be responsible for this. Like, decide a way to make it happen consistently for your teams. That's
Yeah.
kind of the
Okay.
impetus. But
Okay.
yeah,
Cool. An update that I can share on Scott's behalf is that last night he opened a merge request to change the wording in the product itself, where it says dark mode experimental. Um, Update that to use beta. I think he's got a couple of other docs updates in there. Jeremy, I saw he pinged you on one of them to ask something. I don't remember the details of it. But that is to some extent the most important MR of this entire milestone because that's what is going to effectively push us into beta. So if y'all get pinged in it, please watch for it and jump in and help him get that over the line. I don't know if we will do a blog post. I don't know. I don't know how we tend to handle go-to-market motions for things like betas. I at the very least want to start. I've got a new go-to-market counterpart, so I need to reach out to him and see what we could possibly do for dark mode GA. But I don't know about beta. I think if we did any kind of blog post, it'd be something that we authored and published.
Do we, on another note, I'm just kind of rambling
Mhm.
here with dark mode
Yeah,
stuff. So, with the hackathon coming up, and we have a number of like issues that are in the epics for dark mode that are just, there's a few that aren't picked up yet,
yeah.
or I don't know if they're actively being worked on, if they're assigned. Like, would we open any of those up to the hackathon?
Yeah, we certainly could. Alyssa had tried to do that for the source code hackathon that they did. I think the biggest challenge was just that the issues need to be very, very hand-holding. Like it effectively needs to say, go apply this diff. Um, so, we would need to spend some time grooming all of those issues to make sure that they have that level of detail. But if we've got the time and space to do so, we could certainly get them lined up. Awesome. Our other big thing we're looking at is the future of the design system. Mark, how's your research coming along?
Um, so there's a it's one of those things where if you start looking at things and you just pull up threads and you find new threads and you just follow threads forever. Um, and this takes us down lots of paths. Is like there's the narrow scope of mono repos, like getting everything into one repository. So you just update one repository and check out one repository. But then there's things like um, I'm already losing my train of thought here, but there's other threads. Let me see if I can pull it up and have a quick reminder. Like threads like where do we present our documentation? So there's design.gitlab.com, but Lucas raised the good point of, well, if we want a single source of truth, why not docs.gitlab.com? Which is a whole other kettle of fish kind of thing, and making GitLab itself the monorepo, which has its own challenges in terms of CI, where view components live compared to thing. There's a lot to unpick here.
Hmm.
So I've written a lot of my thoughts down on that link. I think I have a few sort of low-hanging next steps that I'm collecting together that hopefully can either do or hand off. Um, if any of you have any thoughts, please do have a read and leave them. There's no such thing as a dumb question or what have you. Yeah, it's. I think a lot of it also is it's unclear what the ideal end state is.
Yeah.
Um, because the space of what is possible is so wide open, it's hard to sort of, it would be nice to have some constraints almost,
Yep.
but we don't have any. I know that there are certainly some things which I know are suboptimal and can be improved, like no one likes Storybook. Pretty clear that Storybook is going to get the boot, in my opinion. At least to be relegated to just sort of a back office kind of thing. So yeah, that's about it in terms of an update there.
Okay. One thing I can do at the very least is take this, like we need more constraints to talk through with Sam and Chris and see if we can narrow down or get a more focused in state of things that'll hopefully nudge the conversation along into a specific endpoint. So I'll put this on the list for me.
I think one as I'm reading through the issue, the we've got a lot of problems to solve kind of crammed in there. And that could be one way to tease this out, like reducing maintenance overhead and improving trust and streamlining implementation. Those could all be solved by the same thing, but they could also be sort of things that we tackle independently. I know sort of at least my original thought coming into this was that GitLab UI and design.gitlab say different things. Let's make them say the same thing. Um, and then, yeah, there's also a lot of other stuff here. So I think, yeah, a good idea would be to tease these apart and kind of see what approaches apply to each specific problem and then maybe go from there.
Yeah, making design.gitlab.com and GitLab UI say the same thing is the place where I started from as well. But then it sort of grew and
Yeah.
metastasized into this huge mess. And I found it difficult to walk back from that. So
Cool. This is very helpful. Are you getting the engagement that you need otherwise? Like, are people chiming into the issue and go like poke people to make sure they take time to look at everything as well?
yeah, I've gotten feedback from the people I've asked feedback from so far, yeah,
Okay.
specifically.
Okay.
But again, any unsolicited feedback is also welcome. So
Yeah. Have you been asking for feedback from folks outside of the design system team? Like, I know there's a bunch of like big front enders here that um, are almost like GitLab UI maintainers as much as we are.
not yet.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is the other thing. There's sort of two angles to solve here.
Hmm.
There's also truth in terms of maintenance for people contributing, and then there's single source of truth for people consuming. And
Yeah.
those are two sides of the same coin, and they aren't necessarily solved in the same way.
Hmm.
We could have a single doc site that pulls from a bunch of different places, and there's no single
Yep.
source of truth. But for consumers, it looks like a single source of truth. So, um, uh, they're almost different questions, I think, basically. And I don't think it makes sense to answer. They don't need to be answered at the same time.
Okay.
And there is also alignment. I think what's easier for people contributing will be easier for people consuming,
Hmm. That
I would
makes sense.
imagine.
Okay. I'll put this on our agenda for me, Sam, and Chris tomorrow. Hopefully, Sam is better. Knock on wood. We'll be able to talk through this, and hopefully, we can provide some guidance that we can use to make some decisions, maybe in the next milestone, on just how we want to move forward with all this.
Out of curiosity, Mark, do you have any like leanings anyway? Is there like out of this issue, is there anything that you would think, yeah, this is pretty promising, or even something that was like halfway promising?
Well, first of all, I'll preface it. I'll say I'm not totally convinced by any approach at all so far. I could be convinced to go in any direction. But if I had to guess, I would say we'd probably stick on Nuxt. We'd combine GitLab UI, GitLab SVGs, the Tailwind documentation viewer, something else I'm forgetting, into the monorepo, which would probably be design.gitlab.com, and we'd publish to GitLab pages, design.gitlab.com, and everything would live there. And we'd keep lookbook where it is. That's probably where I'm leaning towards because, like you said earlier, that's the sort of path of least resistance. That's what we can iterate towards. The bigger bang stuff like making GitLab the monorepo is harder. But maybe that's the right answer. I don't know. But yeah, no, Pattern Lab, no.
Oh, come on, come on. I used
If
it
I
before and it was awesome. I mean, I've used it a couple
did
times.
you see the same thing I saw? And I saw is actually a good play on words there. I thought.
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
no, like you
That is
can customize the output really, really nicely. But
Okay.
um, yeah, like
that's a look.
the more I have, well, it's intentionally that way because the goal is like do something with it. Don't just use it out of the box. So, uh, it, but it builds on the atomic design principles. That's really not what we need here, like because of the fact that like brand and other things are involved. And like we want to have like a code playground and other things like that. Uh, I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff, but like a one to many approach seems to be something that I'm drawn toward. And I don't know how that relates to the concept of a mono repo, but where if we had one like foundational way to build out things, but then we had different channels or levels of responsibility. So it's still a mono repo, still gets pulled together as design dot, but there's ways for brand to contribute. There's ways for UX to contribute. Because that's another thing is like the site right now is so fractured in its purpose. Like it's just a catch-all for UX documentation. There's brand stuff there. I would love to see UX stuff actually get moved to the handbook and not be part of the design dot like design system. Like, I think there's an information architecture approach that we need to look at too. When we've done before. Um, Actually, I could pull up some of those efforts. Some are pretty recent too that I did on that, but I think we need an IA effort too that would help us understand like some of those goals and what they are. And I'd be more than happy to pair on any of that kind of work.
Cool. Seems like some of that could come out of the exercise that Chris ran last month of like, this is the content and the structure that needs to live in pajamas versus needs to go somewhere else. So,
Mhm.
cool. We got some fun stuff to look at over the next couple of weeks. Um, yeah, I'll take these couple of points, talk to them with Sam and Chris, and see if we can get some more constraints and better scope out what it is that we want to do here, so that we can make some decisions and make it all happen. Awesome. Any other topics for today? Anything else y'all want to hit on? Cool. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great afternoon. See ya.